A new standard that is being developed is one large developer or one large builder slash developer, same group, coming in and from a business reality standpoint of what they're presenting to us, it is a series of like homes. I informed the council recently that we had a developer like that who came in, who wanted to take down Doc Carroll's property, and we told them no. There were a number of different reasons besides design standards that we were able to tell them no in that particular case. Again, one of those developers that the council never sees that one, the 9 out of 10. But because it is becoming a nationwide trend to do that and take down a number of lots at the exact same time, and from the builder's standpoint, there is no builder or developer, we know this, who is coming in here for altruistic measures. It's a business. They're here to make money. We wanted to see if the council would be interested in a review and a more rigorous possible set of design standards associated with our residential housing, all sorts. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the two Davids to make this presentation to you all tonight.
Thank you, sir. For this first part, it'll be a joint presentation. I'll let Mr. McCumber start it off. He was able to do a good amount of research into our current code, and so he'll kind of walk the council through what current design standards we already have in the code, when they apply, what they look like, go through some subdivisions that have been developed with those standards. And then on the back end of that, we'll be seeking some feedback from you all on how you would like us to proceed with maybe drafting a couple different ordinances to start maybe implementing some of those things. So to start it off, I'll pass it over to Mr. McCumber to get started.
Thank you, David. So to start this evening's conversation, we are talking specifically about single-family detached dwellings here. So I just want to kind of put that up front here as we're thinking about these different items. So first off, what are residential design standards? I'm sure several of you have heard of this before or deal with them in other types of development. Maybe the multifamily is quite common in other communities that there are design standards for. However, tonight around the single family, we are talking about code requirements that pertain specifically to those single-family developments. These standards could involve things such as architecture, materials, orientation on lots, different lot standards, as well as things like landscaping. Communities across the country have implemented certain standards with a goal to be meeting what the city desires and their expectations for housing. As we talk about this, we also need to keep in mind that there needs to be a good balance between what minimum standards could be and trying to avoid any unintended consequences, such as possibly turning away residential interest in the future. So I just want to keep that in mind. So as it stands today, we have two sections of the Unified Development Code that do address some sort of development standards. The first section is 415.040, which is our planned district overlay. There are certain residential zones across the community that have this specific overlay district on it that apply some standards to those projects. And we'll get into the list of those some of those subdivisions here in a moment that you guys will be able to kind of mentally think about and maybe kind of see where those standards kind of came through in the end result. And then the other section is for multifamily, either single-family attached or multifamily buildings, and that's located in section 420.010 of the Unified Development Code. The first section that is the planned district overlay, I just want to mention that if there is none of this overlay on any of our other residential zones in the community, then these standards just simply don't apply. So there are other areas zoned for single family without this overlay on them. So if a developer were to come forward, they wouldn't be required to follow those design guidelines we have currently. Just to kind of quickly look over from an architectural standpoint, there are three main areas of the planned district overlay when it comes to design guidelines. The first of which is a requirement of multiple front elevations. So for each 10 units, you're required to have one distinct building elevation. So if you were to imagine somebody were to come in and propose 10 dwellings along a street, they would only be required to provide one elevation. And for each 10 units you increase, you're required an additional. There is a top-end cap on that at six facades, different facades required there. But that could span across an entire subdivision. So just wanted to kind of point that out. The next item that is currently in the code under that planned district overlay is a variety in materials. So this section essentially is saying that more than one exterior building material must be offered for at least one housing model for either single or two-family homes. So you could offer 5 models, but only one of them have to have multiple materials. That examples are listed here. So that's currently what's on the code. I think there's maybe some areas for improvement in something like that. And then lastly, the handling of garages on the front elevation. So this particular section is for the detached single family, and it does require that somebody that's providing more than one front elevation, so this would be any more than 10 units are being proposed, one of those elevations has to have one of those 4 options for garages. That's typically what we see is the recessed front-loaded option, where the garage doors are actually set back a minimum 8 feet from the primary facade, which is like where your front door would be and things of that nature. And more times than not, it is just at that 8-foot setback. They don't tend to go much further back than that. And on occasion, the corner lots may have a side or loaded garage option for coming off kind of that secondary frontage. However, all 4 of those are available to choose from, but those are kind of the most common that we see.
So the list before you all this evening is not an exclusive list, but in terms of recent construction activity, and by recent, probably in the last 10 years of homes that have been built, these are all examples of subdivisions that have obtained the P district overlay at some point in their history, meaning that those design standards do apply. What we're, from what Mr. Cumber was presenting, none of these are necessarily the same application of all of those options, meaning that there's going to be some set of different standards in the Eagle Glen subdivision per se, compared to Timber Trails or compared to Wood Creek or some of the homes in Stonegate or the Good Ranch development. But in general, these are probably the more well-known subdivisions that do have the requirement of following those design guidelines. As Mr. Cumber mentioned, any other single-family subdivision that we have that does not have that P overlay, whether it's an R1 zoning or an R1.5 or anything that does not have that P overlay, none of this would apply, meaning there is no requirement for them to submit the multiple elevations. The standards are pretty flexible in terms of what those homes need to look like without some of those additional design guidelines to help guide that development. So just kind of thinking mentally through those projects, you can kind of drive around the community in your mind and just kind of ask yourself, are those subdivisions, do you notice substantial differences as you're driving through those specific subdivisions as opposed to others? Some of the questions that we'll ask here in the second half is, what about those homes do you like? What makes those stand out compared to the more traditional neighborhood model? As Mr. Fearborn indicated, that shift away from maybe one master developer selling to 15 or 20 different builders, we really have gone away from that. So when you look at our older subdivisions like Silver Lake, Lakeshore Meadows, some of those really older neighborhoods that Raymore has, that was kind of under that previous model where you have multiple different builders building right next to each other, as opposed to one builder having control over a whole phase of a subdivision. And so you do start to notice some of those differences as you drive from some of our older subdivisions into more of the newer phases. So in general, hope that kind of explains what current guidelines are in place for the city. As we look towards the question of should we consider amending the Unified Development Code, some of the things that we've kind of heard over recent projects is, some of the concerns that staff has had on the lack of character that we've seen in some new home developments, the lack of variety in the housing types, and by types I mean just the elevations in those facades, if you're talking strictly just single family. Those monotonous subdivisions tend to be more and more common. And so to encourage more interesting or thoughtful neighborhoods or just better, well-designed neighborhoods, some additional consideration might need to be given to how we address that. So what are the options and how can we move that forward? As Mr. McCumber mentioned, none of those requirements apply at all if a developer isn't asking for that P district overlay to help compensate for something else that they might be trying to do in the development. So a couple options for how you move forward. From a staff level, do we look at making those P district overlay standards the bare minimum for any new development going forward, and then look to maybe improve or enhance the P district overlay for when a developer does want to start doing additional things in their subdivision, whether it be different lot types or lot sizes? Do we enhance what those standards would be in order to help maybe support that application or not? Do we contemplate whether or not those existing standards as they are those even sufficient to help improve development as it is, or does that baseline even need some level of improvement there? Within that, are there things that the council would like to see that's not in there? Did that ordinance miss something at the time that it was adopted into the code? Should we be looking at other things other than garage elevations, facades, and building materials? And then the other option, of course, is just to do nothing and kind of see what comes forward in the future. As Mr. Fierber mentioned, I would suspect that model is going to be something that we're going to see in the future moving forward, more and more common as development were to continue in the city. So to kind of open it up for questions or direction, I think some of the direction we'd be hoping for is what are those things that the council would like to see in a possible ordinance, whether it be design guidelines, some monotony regulations to help break up the subdivision, or again, is what we're doing right now, is that enough? So happy to answer any questions that you guys might have.
Okay. Sure, Warren, you want to follow up on that?
Thank you, sir. As Mr. Gress has indicated, kind of where we're at tonight, what we'd like the council to focus your discussion on tonight is what are our options. If the council were to decide, and we've had a number of conversations about this, that you would like to see at least a conversation about enhanced development standards, additional development standards, what we would propose to you if you pick any one of the first three is to come back with you very shortly, not with an ordinance, but with a checklist. Here are the areas you could be looking at. Here are the specifics within those areas you could be looking at: garages, materials, elevations, roof lines, types of roof lines, and then have a very detailed conversation on, okay, here's category A, here are 6 things you could be looking at. Where do you want to land on those? Do you have any of them that you would want removed entirely? Do you have anything that you can think of you'd want added to that? And is it possible to even add that? Is it legal to even add that? But that would kind of be what we would foresee. If you do decide you would like to go to that step 2, and certainly staff can see some areas where there could be some improvement within there as well, we would be proposing to the council that the council gives staff the flexibility if a developer comes in to tell him or her or them that they needed to wait. Because we don't want to get you into the initial approval process and then be saying what you thought existed in the code isn't going to exist in the code, and that may throw your entire model off. That would not be fair to the development community. The other warning we would want to give to the council, and you all know this, but it's worth saying out loud, I think. The more strict the standards, the more stringent the standards, the more you can expect a slowdown in development. For better or for worse, they read our code and they'll know that. And if the national model is going this way and our code is going really far this way, where they can't make that adjustment, some of those developers who we've all bantered their names around would more than likely not be looking at the city of Raymore. And again, for better or for worse. That concludes staff report on this item, sir.
Okay, well, that brings us to the discussion phase. Anybody have any input on this? I know staff is recommending to come back with a laundry list of things, of potential changes we can make to the code, give it a little more thought. Are there people here with that feel things are fine the way they are? I think we have to make that determination, and it would be my recommendation that we give staff the flexibility to come back to us with a laundry list of things that they feel like would make not only our community as attractive as it is right now to develop, but to do it in a thoughtful process that brings quality along with the investment that people want to make in our community. So I like the idea myself of us moving forward with some things that staff has researched and got their arms around and said, this is what we could propose to make our development a quality development, but fair to builders who or investors who wish to be part of our community. So that's my personal perspective, but that's just to kind of start the conversation. I'm kind of opening it up with that. Okay, so if anybody would like to chime in, please chime in. Mr. Holman.
I think that there's some value in exploring this, certainly. I remember in the early 90s to early 2000s, there were three things that people were really moving to Raymore in droves for. One was the school district, one was the public safety, same things we see now, but also the variety of housing. And I don't mean just the, hey, I can get a small house or a large house, but the different styles were a really big deal because that existed at the time, just as they explained that you would have a development and you would have multiple builders, so you could look at 8 to 10 different models within any subdivision, and the economy has changed a little bit and the business model has changed. So I think that there's some value in that. I do have a couple of questions I'd like to pose. I'll just pose them, and the second one may be taken by Mr. Zur. But the first one, welcome, Mr. McCumber, to the city. Glad to have you here. I was wondering if you or Mr. Gress could tell us if you have any particular knowledge, I know you came from Blue Springs, of cities around us, either on either side of the state line, that currently have design standards and what those might look like. And then, perhaps for Mr. Zur, have there been any legal challenges to any of these kinds of design standards that were in place that you're aware of? I know that in addition to if the city were to adopt something a little bit more rigorous, many times the subdivisions themselves have design standards. I know that my subdivision did. There were certain things that the builder had to abide by. There were different builders that could come in, but some of the things you see on here were on that list, and that was over 20 years ago. So this is not without precedent, certainly from different levels. So I leave the two questions I have on the table.
I'll speak in general terms, and I know Mr. McCumber's worked in 2 different communities, and he can probably share his experience from there. I know in general we're not the only city that would be either looking to adopt these or would have already adopted them. The interesting thing about some of our builders is that most of them build in our community and they build in the other communities around us. And so I don't know specifically what each community has on their books in terms of the requirements, but I know they're out there. And so I think that's the proof that some builders are going to be willing to adapt what it is that they're used to building here to something maybe a little bit different. And I think it depends on the spectrum of what, staff may bring back in the future in terms of what might encourage a developer to want to not or to work with the city on that. The one thing I found interesting, and I'll let Mr. Mercumber share his experience in it, but even just looking at our landscaping requirements for new construction, you can take almost the same home that's built here and look in a couple different cities. If you just look at what their different landscaping requirements are in general, the same home is being built, but for example, our code only requires 1 tree per street frontage. Other communities require 2 or 3 trees, maybe some shrubs and some other different types of landscaping. So even moving the needle on something as simplistic as that would make things look just a little bit nicer. But I'll let Dave kind of speak from his experience working in Blue Springs and his other communities on what maybe they had there.
So most cities are similar to where we're at right now. They do have certain overlay districts that have certain design standards that apply to residential construction. Most of those cities also have design standards specific to multifamily construction. And it's in more recent time where we're starting to see cities go down the path of what we're talking about tonight, is setting some sort of base requirement for just residential development in general, regardless if it's in an overlay or if it's just strictly zoned R1 or R1.5 or whatever they may use in their particular cities. Parkville recently approved design guidelines for residential zones across citywide, so that's one that we were looking at. The city of Kirkwood over on the St. Louis side has residential, quite extensive residential design guidelines. I think it's important, though, to just keep in mind that tonight we're talking about, like, what should that, if any, what should the base requirement be? And as Mr. Gress mentioned earlier, that if we consider those base requirements across the city, then thinking about the P overlay district standards, how do we improve those? Because often what happens is the developers coming to the city asking for special requests, like, I know that your lot sizes say they can only be this small, but we really have products that fit on this sizes. Would you be interested in allowing us to do 5 foot less wide lots? In exchange, we will do this and this. So maybe it, setting that baseline and then also considerations for those P zones moving forward, maybe those could use a little bit more modification to bring those standards up as well. I think it's important to keep in mind, but yeah, so.
One of the things that we hear a lot is, how did that get built? And the question typically always is because the code allows it. So that as we kind of put our heads together, we're kind of asking ourselves, is what the code is allowing X to be built. Is X sufficient enough for what Raymore is deserving of in terms of housing quality? And if it is, then what types of things do we start looking at for above and beyond that when we start getting those requests from those developers?
And it's Mr. Gress's comment. Many of the council, you've heard me say many times, don't attack the development. Use the vast knowledge that you have gained from having applications come before you to attack the code. And I get the nods. Tonight we're asking you if you want to attack the code on this. And we think that there are some areas that attack would probably be good. I'll let Mr. Zur tell me where they're not.
Legally, I have less concerns about imposing additional restrictions and limitations or requirements for development as long as you're not trying to change it on a developer midstream. My view of it is the concern isn't necessarily from a legal standpoint. My concern is, are you putting so much involved on the developer that you're going to strangle out development either because of costs rising too high, or alternatively, hey, we just don't want to have to comply with all of the obligations or requirements that go along with that particular landscaping, roofing, et cetera. Yeah.
Thank you. A couple of things. I guess first of all, if something were developed, or like we thought of something tonight, then it goes through council and we vote on it, when would that trigger, like with the development, like before they do a preliminary plat, or like obviously a Sendero is in the middle of development, probably wouldn't apply to them, but say example, a Whitetail that, now is in limbo, if we develop something now, where would that kick in on a future development?
Like it's going to be at the application stage. You're going to have a time frame that any application after the approval of that ordinance is going to be subject to it. Now, you may have multi-phase developments that are out there that already have development agreements in hand that may, and I'm looking down to David for him to shake his head no at this particular point for some of this. If you've got development agreements already in hand that have established those, you're going to still have to comply with the provisions of whatever those development agreement requirements were. That being said, I think you're going to probably see more often than not new applications coming in.
And just only because you brought up two specific developments, I wanted to clarify that with Sendero, for example, that development was approved with approved elevations that they provided and that were approved with that MOU and that agreement. So, we would be looking at those approved elevations at the time that they were submitted. If this was adopted, we would kind of be reviewing it against that. Other projects have been approved that don't have those elevations associated with that agreement, and so regardless of the zoning, these would apply if they were to be adopted. We would probably end up applying those at the final plat stage, meaning if they had a phase that was approved today, they may get the leniency of being able to finish out, those 20 lots. But whatever that effective date is of the ordinance that we'd be working on, it would probably be staff's direction that it applies at whatever that next phase is.
That would be legal's recommendation as well.
Well, I think as Mr. Fearborn mentioned just a few minutes ago, that it really wants to be able to have that message now that we can provide to applicants that we're on hold right now. Just know that we're in the process of looking at our code, potentially changing it. It could be more restrictive in certain areas, but we're not sure what the council's final decision is going to be. And that's what your warning was, is that we be able to offer that up to any new applicants. But certainly, as David outlined for us very clearly, is that what's happening now is really unaffected by any future changes that we would make unless they had not brought the final plat to us, correct?
That's accurate.
Correct.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, Sonia.
So, quick question about what you just said. So how do we expect developers to respond if we say, oh, just hold on a minute, the council's looking at that? I mean, we don't necessarily have a timeline for how long the council or staff may be looking at that. We can't say, if you'll give us 2 weeks, if you'll give us 6 months, what's that timeline gonna look
question.
like? And how do we expect them to respond? If I mean, as a developer, I would assume as a developer, they would be like, okay, fine, I'll go somewhere else. You're telling me, hold, I'll move on down the road.
And that is
the risk
why
we take,
I
right?
said that is a risk that the council will be incurring on this. I think that we owe it to them, though, to say, here's a playing field you're looking at, because as is indicated here, at any point, if a brand-new application came in today, it would take long enough with that application. And I'm not saying that we would go, don't turn your application in. In fact, Mr. Gress and I had this conversation. We would accept the application with the warning to them, by the time this gets through the approval process, there's going to be new rules in place that are going to apply to whatever you're putting in here. Can't tell you what those are yet because they haven't been final approved. And of course, because this is primarily UDC, it's going to be planning and zoning first, and then final council approval. So there is at least a 2-month process in there, and that's after we would get you all the checklist for you to give us something to get what the planning and zoning and ultimately the ordinance in front of the council is going to be. Very good question, though.
Good assessment.
Go ahead, Sonia.
I was just going to follow up and add, I think my 2 cents on this is, on one hand, we don't want neighborhoods that have the cookie cutter houses. We've kind of been there and done that. But on the other hand, if people are buying them, if the market's there, that's what the developers are going to look for. housing prices are so high anyway, I hesitate to say, let's put a whole bunch more cost out there, required for builders and for homeowners. So I think finding a happy medium, a place somewhere in the middle is gonna be the key.
Well, to put it in perspective, I'm gonna ask David, I'm gonna put you on the spot. How many lot plats do we have approved for build right now, but not gotten an application for permit?
I could look that up. I don't have it with me right on hand.
At one point, it was close to 1,000.
Yeah, I would say right now, in terms of lots that you could come in today and pull a permit on, I would say that's probably in the 300s. I mean, it's gotten pretty low over the last couple of years. We've approved a lot of developments, but in order to be buildable, it has to have all the infrastructure. We have a lot of construction going on in the Senderas and some of the Creekmore phases. So I'd say that number right now probably is in the 300s, plus or minus.
I would challenge you on that. I bet it's closer to 500 plus, because you've got Sendera, you've got Saddlebrook, you've got
If you're looking
Right.
at the total lots that have
But they
been
haven't-
approved, it probably is closer to 500 or 600.
Right, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, in that case, it is a lot higher that have been final platted, may not have been accepted by the city yet, but have been approved to be built.
Right.
So that would be kind of the threshold we're looking at. We'd want to make sure we're being fair to what the rules were when those plats were approved. But from a new development standpoint, maybe to your point, if a developer comes into City Hall tomorrow and, requests to meet with our department, I would agree with Mr. Fairburn. We'd be kind of cautioning them, we were happy to read this application, but just so you know, by the time it gets to the city council, they're going to be reviewing kind of a new set of rules for what you could build. You can still build single-family homes here, but what those look like and how you have to maybe think about where those are placed will be maybe a little bit different. I think what you'll find is that you will have some developers that will just go somewhere else. Mr. Fairburn mentioned it, for better or for worse. I think you'll have some that may be willing to kind of wait through it or kind of go just a little bit slower. We were talking the other day, if we happen to get a developer that comes in that has a very quality-looking development with this development, with some of these boxes that are checked that we're kind of talking about, maybe one of those things that we would consider looking at if they're willing to go along with what staff is working on. I think that was kind of the importance of tonight, is to make sure that as we're looking at drafting these regulations in that checklist, that we're doing it through the lens of what the council wants to see in the home construction, in terms of what those bullet points are. Is it the facade elevations? Is it the landscaping? Is it the monotony of the homes in the subdivision? Once we have those, I feel like we'd have a good enough grasp on whether or not can this developer meet the intent of that by the time it gets to you all or not. We would work with them on based on that direction.
And it is short-sighted, and I was guilty of it, to call this an anti-monotony push. It is a much broader picture than just a house, and requires one of those conversations I think this council is very, very good at, as far as driving down to that fifth and sixth level and having a really good, meaningful conversation. If you would like to see a checklist from staff to go down on the bigger picture that's associated with this. Two things. We would be having a further conversation with the council. Mr. McCumber indicated that the initial on this would be detached single-family homes. I believe that there is value in extending the conversation in the future to look at all four of the housing types. If we're going to say this is something that is important to the council because we think it's important to our citizens, we have to look at the broad spectrum of all of our residential. And obviously, they can't all look alike. We can't, it is impossible to apply a detached single-family home standard to an apartment complex, but we have to look at that. Conversation for the future. Do want to alert the council, this seems to be a fitting time for it, and don't want to get into a deep discussion on it because staff doesn't know what all of this means, but since it was brought up earlier, Whitetail is dead. The owner and Mr. Salee could not come to an agreement on it. I've had the opportunity to speak with both of them at this point. There's a lot of finger pointing going on between the two of them on what happened and amounts that were asked for and amounts that were asked to be reduced. At first, when I spoke with them, there was the possibility that Salee was claiming they were still at the table. We now know that that is not the case. So what is in effect down there now is R1 zoning. R1 zoning?
It's still R1P.
The,
I mean, it's been rezoned.
the,
We're pretty sure that that might not exist. The MOU,
The MOU
the
didn't
MOU
get-
is no
that's right.
longer in place.
yeah, that's what I was going to clarify, is
Yeah.
it would be kind of a legal interpretation of whether the zoning reverted, but the MOU that the council approved at this point would be more or less void.
So I have
until-
asked Mr. Zur to look at that package as a whole, because it was all approved as a whole, and make the determination on the zoning that is in place. Right now, my best guess is that the original owner is seriously reconsidering coming back with the original product that he was discussing there. Which is not the original product that is built down there. So that owner, developer is gone. The current owner, developer is Ward Development. They did Madison Valley. So you would be seeing that product, which maybe accelerates the discussion that we're having here.
Mr. Baker?
Thank you. So I guess the one thing I think it would be valid on the UDC is looking at our density of home value. It seems like when we talk about, I hate to say, but homes that are similar and these, potential developments of 500 homes, that, at what cost does it come to the city that we have potentially a 5-foot offset so we could get or allow a developer to put more homes within a site? And again, that would put more population within our city, but I think that puts a strain on our city as well, that when you're putting them that close together, obviously the people down south, had some strong will about what was potentially going in with Whitetail, especially on the southeast corner of that proposed project. But I do think the density of homes, I like the things that we're talking about, different elevations and stuff. I mean, it's clear that even off Dean Avenue, you can see what builders are building in town because their products are very similar. What you see off Dean and Johnston Drive, and then you go over on the east side of town, you see the same products and the same sign of who the builder is. I do think we should have different variety as best we can. It may be different products, but I definitely think it's worthy of maybe looking at the UDC and just seeing what guidelines we put at density, because that was brought up a lot through the Whitetail discussion, that, what is our density and what are we running potentially? A lot of the homes on, the existing part of town that have been here 20 years, they're spread out. And I think a lot of people come here for that reason, to have a nice home. I think we have a lot of product that we built in the last 5 years that have gotten us into that price range where it's an entry-level new home, people coming off an apartment or something like that. But I think going forward, if we look at the density with these potential developers, they're still going to be able to build their properties. They may, instead of 500, they may only get 450 in the spot. But I think that would be better suited, in my opinion, for the city going forward. I don't think it would slow down development. They would just have to see where they're at. And it's interesting what other cities have too, that, people don't necessarily want to see row housing or things that look like that. So just my input, but I think that would be worthy of looking at that and then seeing what happens. So.
Mr. Bills?
My only comment is one, going back to what you said, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me?
Well, I can. I don't know if the rest of them can. Go ahead.
Okay. Is I believe we have enough inventory right now, vacant lot inventory, that we could take 2 to 4 months or whatever to work on this. It might even enhance or speed up some of the existing developments, knowing they've got a little bit of a window here to market their subdivisions or get things in place. And also, I think, again, it sends a great message to our community and our residents that we are listening and we're taking time to look at this. So I feel confident we have enough inventory out there right now that if we, didn't approve anything for 6 months, I don't think it's going to really slow down our development and growth. And so that's my comment.
Thank you. Anyone else? Sonia?
I have just a couple of additional thoughts. First of all, is there a place in the process where we could get some feedback, some input from the builders, the people in that industry? Because no one at this table is there. I mean, we don't know what their world is. And then the other thing that I just encourage the council to consider is sometimes it's hard when we're making decisions, when we're looking at things, to think about, well, that's what I would want, or that's what the few people I know would want, or the people that I've talked to houses about would want. But what we want or what I want isn't necessarily what everybody wants. And I think that it will be important for us to lean on that industry, to ask a lot of questions, and be sure that the decisions we're making are market-driven and not driven by our own personal opinions of what we want. Because I don't think what I want, what I would buy, is what's going to be best in building out the city.
I think that's a fair question. The HBA, or Home Builders Association, exists to work with local governments on those types of things, to resolve those kinds of issues that come about through governmental regulations and changes. I think that's a great idea.
Because I don't want to live in an apartment right
Sure.
now, but apartments have value in our
They do.
community. So I don't think that we should base our decisions on what we want.
Thank you.
And we have had the HBA in before to weigh in on code changes. That's what they're there for.
Yep.
As you indicated, sir. So I'm sure that they would be very happy at a final product to come in and weigh in with both the P&Z and the council on where they see value or where it's going to be a problem for them. So definitely.
Mr. Ingert?
How long have we been utilizing the current standards?
The current UDC was adopted in 2009, and to my knowledge, we have not amended or changed any of the design standards for what we're talking about tonight. So those were adopted in 2009.
So my question would be, would this be a project, and that's not even the right word, but would that be a project that we should be looking at, say, every 5 years?
In general,
Changing that quick?
we have updated our Unified Development Code almost every year. Not what I meant is just not this specific section. So we have brought forward changes in the past to different zoning districts for uses. We've changed requirements on sidewalks that we'll talk about here in just a moment, on increasing the standards on those from 4 foot to 5 foot. So over time, we have done, I think, 32 or 36 amendments to the UDC, but we have never amended the design standards that we're talking about this evening.
Did those changes go over well?
I think that
Well, for the city, but maybe not for the developer.
I think that would be more of a question for the community of what we posed in that first discussion. The neighborhoods that you've seen that have utilized that P district tool, has the council noticed a distinct difference between the neighborhoods that have not? And if so, like we kind of mentioned, what about those neighborhoods do we want to make the new standard for all homes? I think that is what would be most helpful for staff. If you can point out, I really like this home over here, and I like that about it. That allows Mr. McCumber and I to kind of reverse engineer what you're seeing and make it a code requirement somewhere in our code. As we kind of mentioned, right now it really just touches on the facade of the home, the orientation of the garage, and the materials. One thing that we've seen, and we talked about this here last week with the request for those smaller lots, what we've seen is that you take a traditional home that typically has a front porch and maybe a nice pedestrian entrance and then the garage, As you start narrowing down the width of that lot, what you're left with is predominantly a 2 or 3 car garage and a little entry door for the pedestrian. So it kind of goes back into a number of different things, whether it's the design of the home, the form, the materials. That's why from our standpoint, it's going to be a little bit easier if we have some general ideas from the council about what it is that you like, and then staff can spend the time on figuring out how do we put that in the code to make sure that's what gets built, excuse me, moving forward.
Tom?
Yeah, I'm kind of fall back to what you said originally. We wanted to make sure we look at the UDC codes and where we're going in the future. We're the competitive cities, but we don't want to get to the point where the building and the homes are going one way and we just don't tilt, but we flay away to the one side and get to the point where builders and contractors say, you know what, it's not advantageous for me to want to come up with all these heavy codes and expectation to build there. Might want to look and go elsewhere and then get a bad rap and then people just quit going. We don't want to do that, like you said earlier. So I think looking at the UDC codes is fine, and what we want to do, but diversity of different homes, I think is a good idea. I think coming up there and letting people know we change with the times, and what the times are changing. And when you see your competition around you doing that and which way they're going, and you do your research and know this is a positive direction, we need to take that positive direction, stay competitive, and not sway way over, but just tilt a little bit if we need it for our city. I think that's a good idea. Get more ideas, lay this out for us to look at. Here's A, B, C, and D, what we really would like to do in our city for the future and our building for the homes and the diversity. And I think that's a great idea. But we just don't want to get to the point where if we get too many codes, like you said earlier, and you go too far to one side and they go, forget it, we'll go somewhere else and build, we won't even look at you again. We definitely want to get that happening from the builders at all, so.
I think from staff's perspective, there's a couple different options of how significantly we could change the code. There's obviously the do-nothing approach of let the market just dictate what gets built. There's the other end, which is totally change all these requirements to inspire a much, much better product. And then there's kind of the middle ground of things that some of these things that we could look at changing really just requires the developer to think a little bit more about what they're building. Maybe it is just the placement of the homes, or it's the restricting that one elevation can't be within 5 of the similar elevations. So maybe the direction we're looking for is how significant the changes should be. It sounds like I'm hearing a little bit of we still want to be friendly to the development and not necessarily discourage all of it altogether, but maybe make some incremental adjustments to things like landscaping and maybe some facade requirements. There's nothing that says we can't come back in 2 years and move the needle again if we're deciding that didn't give us the desired outcome.
Could I propose to the council from what are the possible options that we leave the out, because again, we're just starting the process. We leave the, number one means there is, every single lot in the city is gonna have some kind of a new restriction if we were to go with that. If we see that we've left holes in it, in the future, we can always make the changes. You know how fond Mr. Gress is of UDC amendments coming before the council. Could I propose an aggressive bullet point 2 that is, let's look across the board at all of these as our first pass, just so that that's in the council's mind as you're looking at the smorgasbord, the laundry list, whatever you want to call it, and we think about it aggressively as a group, and then the decision can be made, these are the standards we want, how are they going to be applied? That can come as a step 2. But that way, the council sees the broad lot size, again, the list that I gave you earlier, we're looking at everything and making a more educated, informed, here's what we would like to see in totality, rather than, I don't want this type of roof. We're kind of putting it all together. Is council okay with us coming back with that?
Yeah, I definitely see doing nothing is not the option for us right here, so I do like the idea of that, and I think the council will be open to those ideas as well.
Staff will proceed accordingly.
Excellent.
Yeah, like Councilwoman Abdul said, I agree with her. If the two Davids can give us more input and flexibility on builders, we're not builders and real estate people, so we don't really have an idea. Like you said, we have an idea of what we like, but we really don't know the intertwining intricacies of what you guys are doing in these different homes. So if you could just kind of enlighten us some more down the road, kind of how these things work, I appreciate that. Yeah, if you could do that somehow.
2005 when we had them in here.
I think it has been that long.
So the council may remember the situation that evolved, and it was more fee, it went to some of the UDC, but it was more fee schedule centered. And at one work session meeting with the council, we had just the building and development community in, and that disintegrated very quickly. There was a lot of shouting at that meeting, so we decided the better way to go would be the HBA because they have a more global look at it. So we will make sure they are in here to give you all feedback.
All right. All right, moving right along, we'll go to the next topic that you have in front of us, is sidewalk maintenance.
I'm going to have
You want to take that?
Mr. Grass.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. All right. Give it my best. All right.
I wasn't able to plug can't reach my cord for my phone, and I'm on low battery, so all of a sudden I go away. I didn't die.
Okay,
I didn't get mad.
all right. All right, thank you.
So the next item for discussion is a discussion on our sidewalk maintenance in the city, some of the programs that we have, some of the issues that have come up over the number of years, and again, seeking some direction from the council on how to potentially move forward. So I wanted to start first kind of touching on the property maintenance code. That is the section of code that dictates how sidewalks are maintained in the city and who maintains them. So in section 545, it kind of elaborates that all sidewalks must be kept basically in a hazard-free condition and kept free of any debris or any encroachments. And I kind of listed in there what constitutes a hazardous condition: a crack with a vertical offset of 1/2 inch, or the general obstruction by a tree or a shrub or a bush that might be obstructing somebody from using that sidewalk. Looking at it from a sidewalk installation standpoint, I wanted to walk through the code a little bit on how the city goes about installing sidewalks, and then we'll touch on the maintenance of that afterwards. Over the number of years, the city has prioritized the installation of sidewalks and completing our sidewalk network. We have had previously a very extensive sidewalk on undeveloped lot program where as subdivisions get built out, we look at the missing links of our sidewalk network. There are certain provisions that once they are met, the city can force a sidewalk on a lot that does not have a home to be built. There's a process that we go through to notify the property owner. They have essentially 1 year after that notification to either build a home on the lot or build the sidewalk themselves. If they don't build the sidewalk within that time frame, the city will take the responsibility of constructing the sidewalk and then sending the bill to the property owner to have that paid. On the flip side of that, on the opposite, would be our sidewalk gap program, which is traditionally another program that the city takes on. It is typically smaller, missing links that are not generally in residential subdivisions. They're going to be more along commercial corridors. The city identifies those on an annual basis, and we generally complete those with our annual curb program. We absorb the cost of that. We don't pass on the cost of that to, in the case of that project. From a maintenance standpoint of what we've done with our sidewalks is generally 2 items. Public Works has a maintenance program in which they will go out and mudjack sidewalk panels that have either sunk or cracked. And then also on certain cases where that can't be done, they will go in and tear out the sidewalk and replace it themselves. It's generally just work that our Public Works Department takes on every year as we get different complaints about sidewalk issues in the city. Kind of comparing what our policy versus our practice and kind of what has actually been happening. That section 545 that I brought up, that is written through the lens of it being the homeowner's or the property owner's responsibility to maintain and take care of that sidewalk. Meaning if a violation or a hazardous condition is identified, code contemplates that our code officer will notify them of that being deficient and go through the abatement process or the corrective process to get that fixed. However, what we found in our practice is that historically, the city has taken that responsibility on ensuring that those items are fixed, meaning, again, through that sidewalk maintenance program, the city has just gone in and had the historic practice of doing the mud jacking and or the replacement without passing that cost on to the homeowner. We've kind of taken on the responsibility of maintaining that sidewalk network altogether. So staff was directed to do a little bit of research on what other cities are doing. And through that research, looking at kind of our list of standard cities, most cities do pass on the responsibility of the maintenance and repair to the homeowners and the property owners. They are responsible through that code enforcement process of bringing their sidewalk into compliance. What we found through that research, though, is that there's kind of one to three, if not all, different programs that the cities will use to help offset the cost of doing that to the homeowners. So on the last page of your slide is kind of a rough outline of those three programs. Just a quick pass through of that. Either a cost sharing or a reimbursement program, meaning the homeowner may be required to, the city may take on the installation and payment of that sidewalk up front, but they will pass the cost along to the homeowner directly. That has to be paid within a certain amount of time, obviously. The other option would be kind of a contracted service rate, meaning the city is going to bid out all of that work. They're going to identify the list of all the sidewalk complaints that we've gotten throughout the year. As part of that annual curb project or something, they're going to bid it out and obviously get a little bit lower rate than what a individual resident will be able to get, but they would still be responsible for paying that back, just at a little bit lower rate. And then the last one would be a little bit similar to that, where the city will work with the property owners to fix the sidewalk and get it repaired, but they will work similar to our code enforcement process already, work with the county assessor to maybe defer the repayment of that cost over 3 to 5 years on their tax bill through a special assessment or something similar to that. So just kind of three ways at looking. How does the council want to proceed with the maintenance aspect of it? Kind of like our similar conversation, do we do nothing and just keep doing what we're doing? Or is there interest in kind of looking at a different model and how do we move forward with that? So happy to answer any questions. I'll pass it over to Mr. Fearborn.
Thank you, Mr. Gress. There's been a considerable amount of staff discussion regarding this item, and staff disagreement regarding this item, and most of that agreement has been the man sitting to my left and myself. The problem that exists in my mind is there has to be a change, because we cannot have code say one thing and practice be another. That is our greatest liability. And as you've heard Mr. Zur say many times, trust the code, follow the code. We're not following the code. The code says it's, and there are a lot of different fingers to this. To what degree are our citizens responsible if we put sidewalk maintenance on them? Does that include mud jacking? Does that include total replacement? Does that include getting the snow off of them? Does that include a more aggressive policy when they're blocking the sidewalk? There's a whole big thing out there. Mr. Gress also indicated, and he was a little bit more timid in it than what we have found, in that we can't find anybody who doesn't have the responsibility in one form or another on the homeowner. Yeah. So since our existence, we have always taken that on. We've invented programs where we're taking it on with the sidewalk gap program, et cetera. To that end, though, I do feel that before I make a final recommendation to the council, Mr. Zur should probably be weighing in on this, because it is a significant liability and legal item.
Yeah, thank you. The notion here is the more that the city undertakes, the higher the level of liability the city also accepts. So if we are imposing the obligations on the individual citizens to maintain their sidewalks, whether that be mudjacking, clearance for snow or otherwise, the more you put that off onto the individual citizen, I hate to say it that way, the more you put it off on the individual citizens, the less potential liability the city maintains in that. As it is right now, we do in fact receive litigation and claims associated with injuries that occur on sidewalks, and it's how we've operated by going out and improving, repairing, or otherwise that brings some of that litigation or that liability back to the city. So what you really are trying to do, and what my hope is that the council will do, is give direction either, hey, let's follow the code like what the code tells us to do, or let's change the code and institute something so that we have a program out there that's able to address this, understanding that that program is going to bring with it costs, time, man-hours, whatever that might be under Public Works at this particular time, but that's going to be an obligation for the city to look at. We just need to have conformance between what our practices are and what our actual code says to do. Happy to answer questions.
Anything to add to that?
Yes, sir. So we already, to the end where I said we have to do something, we haven't done anything so far, and insurance has picked up the cost in spite of what our code says when we have an accident occur. Liability that does hang out there is if we take this all on ourselves, that there will be an increase at some point. Right now, we're seeing an increase, as a matter of fact, in the number of claims to the insurance company that come in. Some of those are taken on by the insurance company because they're very obvious. Some of those are not nearly as obvious and seem to be a little odd. So any miselevation in a sidewalk just between slabs of a half an inch or more, that is considered out of compliance. We have no idea how many of those exist in this city. We've got a lot of sidewalk. We have the odd issue with Original Town, where the planned overlay district for Original Town, they don't want sidewalks. They have said, we don't want sidewalks here, but there are sidewalks in Original Town that are the original stone, where it's grass in between stone, and who knows when the sidewalk was laid. All of that is in staff's mind. If we make code in compliance with our practice for our citizens, we will be writing brand-new code to be challenged. Because it doesn't exist. We cannot find a model for what our practice is. With all those being said, it would be the city's manager's recommendation, and probably only the city manager's recommendation, to protect my staff, that the council have code written to adopt the entire city sidewalk system as part of our transportation network and have it be considered part of the transportation network of the city and the city's responsibility. In the near term, I do not see an influx of claims increasing. I don't see a change in our near-term repair costs. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that will change. And we'll have to figure out how we are going to handle that as sidewalks age, as everything else does. So far, the council has been very, very good about plugging in various portions of sidewalk and it being able to be done within our existing budget. We hope that that would continue to exist and we could continue to affect these repairs accordingly. But I do think that the change to the code would be, and I would add, for our arterial roads, we actually adopt the sidewalks as part of the transportation network. So I'm not making up that language that actually exists there. We would just simply be applying that same language now, deleting the existing residential sidewalk and inserting language that made it part of the transportation network, and then formally adopting those by the council at a different council meeting. Would be a two-step process.
Snow
And now
clearance.
Mr. Zur is going to weigh in.
Does that mean we're going to be providing snow clearance as well? Are we going to be removing limbs? Are we going to be removing obstructions? Are we going to take on that obligation as well?
No, because what we, a third step would be beefing up, Mr. Zur, Mr. Gruss, you're starting to look alike to me, oh my gosh, in this argument. There is a section of code that discusses sidewalks and inclement weather. Am I correct?
Yeah, so it's kind of, under the hazardous conditions, it does exempt that, basically, not natural disasters, but snowfall and, you know, a mudslide, those types of things are exempt, do not need to be cleared by the resident as it is today. Limbs and trees and shrubs that are more overgrowth do have to be trimmed, but snow removal, mud debris and things like that generally are exempt from that requirement.
Mr. Mills, you had a question?
Well, it kind of pertained to that, is I like the idea of the sidewalks being part of our transportation network. My only question, like right now, I shovel the sidewalks in front of our lots when it snows, but I just want to make sure I don't want the public to think that now the city's responsible for not just plowing roads, but they also got to clear all the sidewalks. So, I mean, I think we need to make sure there's a distinction between maintenance and, you know, just basically keeping the sidewalks free and clear.
Absolutely, and that would need to be something that was clearly delineated. If the council were to adopt these, we would have to be getting back with, within that process, that would have to be out there very clear, sir.
Mr. Burke?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not really understanding how it would be beneficial to the city to take on all these miles of sidewalks for the length of history. And as we build more and more miles, we're gonna build more and more and more. How are we gonna be able to handle all this?
The reverse of it is going to be, well, again, the caution I just gave the council. If we do this, we're gonna have to figure out a way to do that. We've been doing it so far, with our growth so far, and we have not had problems on it. But there will be an additional cost, not in the immediate, but in the 5 to 10 year term, there'll be an additional cost associated with this. The reason I make the recommendation is because we have zero history of not taking it on. And I am not so sure that if, for anyone sitting in this room, if the sidewalk next summer cracked in front of your home and one of your neighbors complained about it, and we came to you with a citation saying, you have 30 days to pay $2,000 to get this sidewalk. Now, we do have this plan in place where we'll let you wait till it's on your tax bill, but I'm not so sure that our citizens would understand that in light of our history.
Mr. Holman?
A specific piece, you mentioned the stone sidewalks probably in Old Town. Some of those got to date back close to 100 years or more. I would challenge whether those were ever put in by any city entity or not. More than likely, the local homeowner, I would be opposed to. I mean, we either are going to be able to repair that to a standard that it's set would be ridiculous. We would either have to remove completely or put in a new standard sidewalk in those locations to correct any, if one of those stones tips. So those in particular spooked me a little bit because of the age and the style. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Because of the overlay district, Original Town would be one of those areas where it did not apply. And again, all of this puts me in kind of foreign territory for your city manager, because I'm actually saying, let's do something that's going to cost the city more.
If I could clarify, just based on your comment, the unique thing about that overlay district in original town, you know, when the residents, that plan was approved, that was a very involved neighborhood process before I was here, but in that plan, it actually calls out the 3 streets where sidewalks are required, which would be the ones that the city has built as, you know, many years ago. It was the connection to the school, connection to the park. In practice, we have had calls from residents who say, hey, I've got these stones in my front yard. Do I need to keep them? And our answer has historically been, if it's not on this street or that street, you are free to remove them. We always let the residents do, we have never done that to my knowledge, but the residents are free to take those out if they are not on one of those 3 streets in original town.
In fact, there are a couple of locations in original town where I think the stones along the street exactly match the stones that lead up to the house. So you know it was the homeowner putting them in.
Yeah. Any further, Mr. Circo?
Well, I guess when you get into responsibility liability, you get in homeowners insurance, which I've done for many, many years I did. And let me tell you how we look at it in homeowners. Property line of a homeowners that we cover liability on, when it contracts to the 3-foot sidewalk, the 2 or 3 foot grassy knoll that goes from the street, and they have a 10-foot leeway, we don't look at it at the property where we're covering liability. You get hurt in the front yard or the side yard, and you have a claim of liability. But if you get fallen on the sidewalk, which we consider the city, or the homeowners say, hey, we're not covering it, and we won't, and they'll fight you in court because they'll never cover that. And the other side of that, if you're out cleaning snow on a sidewalk that insurance companies will consider city, and you choose to, but then someone comes down because you didn't get it cleared and it's icy and they fall. Now they want to come back and sue the homeowner because you cleared it, not to say, but you cleared it and you left an icy knoll and I got hurt. Well, then their insurance company say, I don't care what he did, we're not covering it. So insurance companies on homeowners would not take that as owner of the property, because that's not our property. We'll never look at it as it is our property. There's another problem you run into sometimes with that. Then you get into another can of worms and it gets really ugly.
Anybody else? Any input? Okay. So what are you
Is-
seeking here tonight, sir?
Is the, I can't even believe I'm saying. Would the council be okay with staff bringing an ordinance before you all as step 1, adopting all sidewalk within the city, residential and arterial, as part of the transportation network and the responsibility of the city for your consideration?
Ms. Duggan, sure.
Just a quick question. I'm not opposed to that, but quick question beforehand. So our code doesn't say what we do. Have we asked the other cities whose codes we know read like ours, are they actually following their codes too? Like, are there other cities potentially who have it written one way but are doing it another way?
Nearly every city surveyed, it's on the
actually are
homeowner.
charging.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we looked at 12. We were the only ones that take on that cost ourselves. Everyone else does pass it on to the resident through one of those different programs.
And in fact, I think if you would have looked, you'd seen, if you saw the news over the most recent holiday, the snow, they would have had snow reports from, I know we saw them in Des Moines, we saw them in Shawnee, where they were actually having news individuals come on and say, hey, for those individuals who live here in these cities, your obligation is to remove the snow at this particular time. You've got the next 48 hours in order to do so.
And in fact, every year, one of the news channels always reports on Lawrence, because Lawrence is brutal about enforcing, you've got 48 hours to get out and get your sidewalk shoveled.
Mr. Bill?
I was supportive of staff
Okay.
taking that recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. All right, let's move forward with it then. All right.
We will move forward accordingly.
Okay, and the last issue is vehicles, parking. Want to talk about that?
I'm turning this entirely, well, I take that back. We need to be very, very careful with this conversation, and the reason we need to be very careful with this conversation is because you will remember that Mr. Zur is also your special prosecutor. So, Mr. Zur.
So you have raised issues with regard to hoarding of vehicles on properties. We do have a hoarding provision within the city that's been adopted and has been utilized in the past on internal residences in certain circumstances. It's come to our attention there are a couple of properties that may be of concern or issue with regard to vehicles. Those are currently working themselves through the municipal court manner. And so my recommendation is, from our perspective, we are looking at the code, we are looking at enforcing as it's currently stated as to this particular area. We don't foresee a need to alter it at this time, but it will be dependent somewhat on the outcome of our most recent municipal cases on the matter.
We have two properties in the city that are extreme in the number of vehicles that they have parked in the front yard and really everywhere on the property. As Mr. Zur indicated, we are utilizing the relatively new hoarding ordinance as well as where you can park vehicles on a property ordinance that has been in existence since the beginning of time. Those properties are currently working their way for the first time through the municipal court process. And I think we were going to come to you all tonight with some questions on direction you would like to see. It would be premature to have that conversation prior to knowing exactly how the court's going to rule on this. And once that is done, depending on how the result of that, we will be coming back to you all, either reporting, we think that this is an effective tool for getting to the end we think the council wants, or in conjunction with what we're seeing happening in the court, here's a proposed ordinance that we would have relative to this particular issue. But most of the council is probably aware of at least one of the properties that we're talking about here. And we just want you to know staff's on it, on this issue.
Because these are pending cases, I'm going to request that you kind of restrain on questions as well.
Yeah, this one was more informative than anything else.
We'll wait and see how the courts rule on that, okay? All right. We're just bringing it forward because you and I have received complaints on one piece of property in our district where we live, and
We just didn't, I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Yeah,
We just
no.
didn't want to think that it was going ignored or unaddressed.
Right. No, exactly, because we have been asked about that. All right. Anybody, do you have anything under other? No reason to go into executive session? Mr. Mills, thank you for joining us tonight. We are adjourned. Oh, did you have something, Jay?
No,
Your point down there.
Mr. Gress, can you turn off the